planning and deploying virtual machine manager services. Now, if you thought that the 7413 exam, and therefore this series, was going to be all about Windows Server 2012, well, you're only partially right. You see, in order to really manage Windows Server 2012 in a modern environment, which in Microsoft's mind involves the private cloud, you do need other tools, and System Center Virtual Machine Manager is one of those. So we're not going to dive super deep in this, but there are a few concepts that you need to know in order to kind of have this thing up and running in your environment and start serving the purpose of helping you better manage all of the virtual machines that are running around running Server 2012. In this nugget, we'll cover some of the major elements of System Center Virtual Machine Manager, focusing on VMM 2012. I'll do a quick overview just so you can kind of understand what this thing is supposed to be doing for you, and then we're going to dive into something called service templates. We'll also talk about 3 different types of profiles within VMM: operating system, hardware, and capability profiles. I'll show you how you can set up an image and template library and how to manage logical networks within your VMM fabric. Virtual Machine Manager is designed to provide kind of an abstraction between the virtual machines that run on your virtual infrastructure and the actual host hardware. So you've kind of got this line in the sand. You, as the admin, kind of have to worry about both sides. But there's also a model that some organizations can implement that gives a little bit of visibility at this layer to users, not necessarily end users, but maybe people outside of IT, while still hiding all this back-end infrastructure. Now, in terms of terminology, this back-end infrastructure in the VMM world is called your fabric. And that includes all of the hardware assets, all of the real things that you can put your hands on and touch that make your virtualization infrastructure work. The front end is all, obviously, virtual machines. But VMM kind of tries to make things easier on you all around. For example, a lot of organizations will virtualize their domain controllers. And at the beginning of time, every domain controller looks virtually identical. So, to speed things up, Virtual Machine Manager lets you create templates. Now, at a very simple level, a virtual machine template primarily focuses on the hardware configuration for a VM. What drives are hooked up to it, how much memory it has, how many processors it has, that type of thing. VMM 2012 introduces a new concept called a service template, which not only has that hardware information, but tells me that this is going to be running Windows Server 2012, that it's going to have the ADDS role installed, and that upon installation, it's going to run a script or a series of commands which actually promotes the thing to a domain controller, perhaps joins it to a domain first, all that sort of extra software stuff. Now, a domain controller is probably not the best example of a service, but it's a very simplistic example, so it's a good place to kind of start. The reality is that a lot of our services these days, and by services, I'm really starting to talk about line of business applications. A lot of our services might consist of an app server. They might need a SQL server. They might have a web tier or some kind of middle tier. It consists of multiple things. Well, a service template can represent that entire set. So you can say, look, I want to make sure that when someone pushes the button to deploy this, all of these things get configured. Now, obviously, each of those has got different needs and requirements, and so another thing we're going to be looking at are profiles. And that's saying something like, this virtual machine can only run on a host that has at least this much RAM, this much disk I/O capability, this much CPU capability, and so forth. Now, by defining that capability, it means this virtual machine knows, well, System Center VMM knows which hosts are capable of running that VM and which ones aren't. So as you need to rebalance and dynamically move your workloads around, VMM already knows which hosts have the ability to run that VM and, in fact, which ones have the ability to run the entire service. You might, for example, say that, well, SQL Server is a really crucial part of this, and so SQL can only run on hardware that has certain high availability capabilities. Well, all right, that means it's going to run on this host, and it can run on this host because these two are bonded together in a high availability cluster. But it can't run on this one or this one because those are all too standalone, and they don't have the high availability that that particular thing needs. So you start to define kind of at a business level and kind of at a high technical level what the needs of each virtual machine or each service actually are. And then you let VMM worry about moving them from place to place as needed. Of course, you can float them from place to place too, but it kind of turns all of this into a kind of a dumb infrastructure. You know, when I say dumb infrastructure, think about your cell phone. When you walk around town, you don't worry about all the magic that's happening, and you don't worry about what tower you're talking to because all the towers are the same to you. You just walk around and talk and surf the internet and everything else. Well, that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with virtual machines here. These back-end hosts just become commodities, each with certain capabilities, and we allow a virtual machine to be on whichever one makes sense for right then, but we don't really care so much. At the end of the day, all of these back-end things are the same. They're just a utility. What we really care about is what's going on inside that virtual machine. And so that level of abstraction is what System Center Virtual Machine Manager is trying to achieve. Now, on the self-service side, it's not inconceivable that an organization might say, you know what, I've drawn a line. Users cannot see what's underneath this line. That's the hardware. Those are the cell towers. We don't care about those. But I'm going to allow users to deploy their own cell phones, well, their own virtual machines. So if a department head in marketing decides, hey, we've got a new product coming up and we want to spin up a new website and it needs to have certain capabilities, they can go in, deploy a service template, which might consist of multiple virtual machines, and that can count against their self-service quota. So you can assign them a limit on how much of this they deploy. And perhaps when the product launches over and they don't need that anymore, they can spin down that service, deleting the virtual machines and freeing up some of their quota to go toward other tasks. At the front end, they're just saying, deploy me a web farm. I mean, literally, that's what you might call the service, a web farm. On the back end, VMM worries about where things go based on the capability parameters that you've set up. So that's what we're going to dive into and start looking at, is actually looking at all the different templates and profiles and what you can set up and how all these pieces physically fit together. Okay, so this is System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2012, SCVMM 2012. In terms of requirements, it does need at least 40 gigs of space on the whatever computer you're installing it on. It does not get particularly excited about being installed on machines with other System Center 2012 components. It does need access to a SQL database, and that can be Express. And in a very small environment, Express would be sufficient. Otherwise, in a larger environment where you're really hammering that, you're going to want the full version of SQL. But it can talk to a SQL server that you already have in your environment. It doesn't need to be a standalone one. You need at least 4 gigs of RAM to run this thing. And you're going to have to download the Windows Deployment Kit. And there's a couple of things it needs off of there. And the easiest way to kind of get all that information is just to read through the prerequisites when you go to install it. It's much clearer, and it actually provides you with clickable links to go get all of those things. All the other prerequisites it needs, though, are free. SQL Express is free, but obviously, if you wind up needing the full version of SQL, then you'll need a little bit more. So that's system requirements. Let's talk templates. I'm going to start with a VM template here. Let's actually create a new one just so you can see what goes into this. I am not going to use a existing VM template. I could grab one from a virtual machine that's already been deployed. In other words, this is actually what I like to do. The first time you build a server, you typically build it manually so that you can make sure all the right stuff gets clicked. And then you can turn that into a template nice and easily, so it's more replicable. But you could also pick an existing VM template or a virtual hard disk that's stored in the library. There's not a bunch here, and I'm not going to walk through this whole wizard because the next one's actually better, but as you can see off to the side, really you're just configuring hardware, operating system. It's mainly hardware. If you start picking off some of these other things, it winds up becoming a service template. And so that's why I'm just going to skip out of here and build a service template. That's really what we're here for anyway. So create service template. What are we going to name this thing? Let's call it web farm. You can choose at this point one of these patterns, either a single machine, a multi-tier application, 2 or 3 tier. I'm just going to start with a single machine. You can always add more tiers to it. This is not it's not a one-time thing. Now, interestingly, it's creating all this with Windows PowerShell, and if you click the View Script, you can see the command that it's about to run. It's kind of a cool way to learn PowerShell. And you can obviously, because that was just Notepad, you can copy that out of there if you want to and use it to build a script that does all of this for you. So single tier pattern. Let's get this underway. Move this out of the way. What you really start off with here is this is your tier. So this is your virtual machine. It has an operating system setup. It has a, oops, my screen slid around. It has a OS setup. It has CPU. There's no NIC connected. You'll notice that a couple of things are wrong with it as you begin. That's what this little red sign is saying. And it says the template has to have at least one virtual disk. And if you are also going to keep going, then it's got to be connected to a logical network. The easiest way to get into this is double click this dude. And this is that same basic wizard again, but now we're going to be able to walk through the whole thing and really talk about this from a service level. So let's see, we can say this machine is allowed to be scaled out, meaning we can have multiple versions of this particular VM to help meet the workload. We're going to default to just one instance, but if things get gnarly, we'll let it go up to 4 instances, and we always want at least one. Hardware side, let's just walk through the whole thing. Cloud capability. Well, we're going to get into the fabric capabilities in a bit, but right now I'm going to say this virtual machine only runs on Hyper-V. It's kind of a neat thing that folks don't always realize about System Center Virtual Machine Manager is that it is completely capable of helping you manage your Citrix Zen Server VMs and your VMware vSphere, or ESX as they call it, VMs, all from this one console. We're going to stick with Hyper-V. We're going to say it has one processor. Do allow the migration of this to a host that has a different processor version. So you can turn that on or off, and it lets you migrate this across a broader variety of hosts. We're going to actually give it a bit more memory. No floppy drive, no COM ports. We'll just use the default video adapter. This Microsoft Remote FX 3D video adapter is good whenever you're going to be running a terminal server, remote desktop server inside of a VM. That's nice for that. We do need to add a hard drive, so I'm just going to add a local disk. We'll add it to channel 1. Oops, channel 0, first one. We'll add a SCSI adapter to it. There's the SCSI adapter. And the thing here is you can have it create a new virtual disk, in which case you need to give it a path, or I'm just going to pass it through to the physical drive on the host computer. We can hook up a network adapter if we want to, connect it to a network. I still have to show you how to manage logical networks, so we'll get to that. Normal availability, no data center recovery. Oops, missed BIOS. Nothing particular in the BIOS in terms of the startup order. CPU priority normal, virtual NUMA enabled, memory weight normal. These are all allowing you to configure different aspects of how this virtual machine will participate with the rest. For example, memory weight says if you've got this on a host, and memory utilization is already really high. In other words, the host is kind of nearing its limit. Virtual machines with a higher priority get their memory first. And that way you can kind of keep your more mission critical apps running and maybe starve a less critical app. So here's where we start making this a service template and more than just a VM template. This is where we start to configure the operating system. Admin password, product key, time zone, all those things can go along with a virtual machine as well, but now we can also add roles and features. So let's scroll down here. I'm just going to add application server. We'll put the .NET framework on there. We'll put web server support. Any features we want on there? Sure, let's put version 3.5.1 of the .NET framework. What else is in here? Oh, let's put the Windows PowerShell ISE on there, just because there's no reason to, but we can. We'll put Windows Server Backup on there. Okay, fun stuff. It starts off joined to a domain, a work group. You can have it join a domain, so that's really nice. And then you can set up answer files and a GUI run once. So this is the script that's going to be run at first logon, and that can allow you to do additional custom configuration tasks that aren't covered in here. That's just the operating system. Now we can get into the application. What operating systems, what guest operating systems is this VM compatible with? So we can pick all these different things here. We can choose what OSs we want this to run on. We can add applications We can add scripts, so add SQL Server data to your application, a web app, we can add a script, whatever. We can set up its SQL Server. I'm just saying that this doesn't need SQL. Add in custom properties, base settings. Now, this is what I mentioned earlier. If we're allowing this virtual machine, this service template to be self-provisioned by a self-service user, then when they provision this, how many of their quota points do they have to spend? This is like money. How much money do they have to spend in order to get this thing running? And once they've spent all their money, they can't have any more until they spin down virtual machines. So you can set that up there. It has not found any dependencies I need to worry about. Let's see if it validates. Great, it validates. Let's click OK. Again, there was the View Script button down there that I could have used to see the PowerShell script that's really running under the hood. Now, you get some of those same little setting things in here, and eventually, yeah, it'll validate and the warning messages will go away. So we can kind of click whatever of those things we want to. Once we save it, saved, validated, good. So this is all actually in a separate window, this template designer. So I can close the window, get back to the thing, and then I see my new thing under service templates. I can now export this to an open virtualization format XML file, which makes it easier to carry it over to another VMM instance if I need to. I can design it, which is where we just were. If I click that, it's just going to go back into this thing. I can configure its deployment. I can publish it out and make it available. Probably shouldn't have done that because now it'll probably take a little while, but that's okay. We can still keep using this thing while it decides what it wants to do with that in the background. So you can set up all these templates, and the idea is you pick the things that you frequently have to set up. I mean, if somebody's constantly calling you saying, we need a web server, set up a service template, bundle the whole thing together, and then even if you don't want to make it self-service published, that's fine. You can still, as an admin, come in here and click a button. Because all of this happens in PowerShell, you could even make that still part of a self-service action, but you could build it elsewhere. Maybe you're going to have that PowerShell run as part of a web portal that people go to where they have to enter accounting or cost information or something else. So because of the integration of PowerShell into this, you can really use this and integrate it into a lot of different business processes. Now, the other thing I told you, or another thing I told you we were going to play with is profiles. And you've got a lot of different profiles in here. We're going to focus first on hardware profiles. So we can create one. And this is really just a description of hardware. So it looks a lot like the VM template, but it's where we can configure processor, memory, all these different things that get attached to it. Those play, no, I don't want to save this. Those play into also capability profiles. Now there's some built in here already. Let's take a look at one of those. This describes a host, and it also describes the needs of a VM or service. Now, you remember when I created that service, I checked off that it needs this Hyper-V capability protocol. Now, what that means is in order for that VM to work, it needs to be running on a Hyper-V hypervisor. The machine has to have between 1 and 64 processors. It has to have between 8 megabytes of memory. That seems crazy, doesn't it? And a terabyte of memory. It needs to have this many DVD drives. So these are all the things that the host must meet. And when a host meets these things, it is known for having this particular capability profile. And any VM which needs this capability profile could then run on that host. So that's what those are for. And that's where you can define things like availability. In fact, that was all the way at the bottom. This is where you can define the availability, highly available VM. Is it required? Is it disabled? Whatever else. So you can create a separate capability profile, for example, called highly available Hyper-V or clustered Hyper-V or whatever you want to call it. So again, that describes a host's capabilities, and a VM can only run on a host whose capability profile matches the VM's capability profile need. We've also got operating system profiles. And this is going to look real similar to that other section of that wizard. Identity information, password, operating system, time zone, product key, domain, and so forth. So the idea behind these profiles is just to create a set of short, convenient I don't want to use the word templates because that's already used in here, but that's really what they are, is pre-packaged little definitions of what I want. So I could have a guest OS profile for Enterprise Edition Server 2012, and it's going to specify my product key and that it joined to a domain, and it makes it very easy for that to become a standard across all my other virtual machines. You'll see that you can also set up host profiles. We'll take a look at what those look like. This has, we need to put a description in here. This has got things like what its virtual hard disk operating system image is going to be, hardware configuration, OS configuration. So those are for your hosts. We've got SQL Server profiles. And this is going to let me choose my SQL Server deployment mode. So what are my service accounts going to look like? What's the instance name? What's its product key? And SQL Server only, I know it seems like a little prejudicial that why is SQL Server in here and nothing else? SQL Server is such an important infrastructure component, and it is used, at least in the Microsoft world, by so many applications that they wanted to build it in here. And that's part of what gives you the ability to deploy not just a VM, but an entire service, which might include SQL instances and other things. So everything kind of gets deployed as a block. You manage its life cycle as a block. You upgrade it as a block. You spin it down as a block when you no longer need it. You move it around from place to place as a block if need be. So that's kind of what all these profiles are for, is a way of configuring standards that can then get reutilized across those VM templates and the service templates. Now, one of the words that I said VMM likes to use is fabric, and there's even a tab over here. And as you can see, this is, let me collapse these so you can see them all. This really represents what we used to call infrastructure. We've got our servers. So part of our servers are VMM library servers, where our templates and images are served up from. Pixie boot servers, servers to deploy updates, my VMware vCenter servers, and of course, VMM itself. On the storage side, we've got all of our classification and pools. We've got storage providers, arrays, and importantly, file servers that are linked into this. The networking side gets to be the probably biggest piece. Logical networks, which we'll come back to in just a sec. MAC address pools, any load balancers that you've got built in to balance load between redundant services or load balance services. The IP does not stand for very important person. Wish it did, but it doesn't. It stands for virtual IP, so we can create virtual IP address templates. Switch extension managers, logical switches, port profiles, gateways, it's all here. Logical networks is one of the cooler things, and it's certainly something you'll be dealing with a lot. Let's look at what you have to do. You can say that network sites that are within this logical network are not connected, and you can allow new virtual machine networks that are created on this logical network to use network virtualization. And the actual configuration of this is fairly straightforward. You add network sites. And so that adds to a logical network, and it associates a virtual LAN and a subnet with groups of hosts. So when you enter these, you have to use this classless interdomain routing notation, meaning you would enter in this case, 192.168.1.0/24 means a 24-bit subnet mask. So that written out, it would be 255.255.255.0. So the network piece here would be 192.168.1, and then the host piece would be whatever is in the last octet there. Or alternately, if you're a big fan of IPv6, then that's how you could do that. So just a real quick look at what this looks like. I've created the logical network. I've added a site. That's what this is a site. I can allow host groups to access this, and then I would add, in order to get past this part of the wizard, I would add whatever VLANs are appropriate on my network. And that just allows you to associate all those things together. Obviously, your virtual machines have to be on a network, so you create these logical networks, and that helps provide an attachment and an overlay to your physical network as well. So you got quite a bit of hardware to worry about in here. Typically, once you set this up and you plan for it, it's all good. This stuff is really just going to overlay against your existing infrastructure. You're not so much creating something totally brand new as you are creating a virtual representation of what used to strictly be physical architecture. You know, we used to have real switches and real hardware load balancers, and now all that stuff is virtual and runs in software, and this is where it gets set up. And I mentioned that one of the types of servers we have is library servers. This one I'm on is a library server, so I can go to the library, and this is where we were before. And you can see that I've got a lot of different stuff in here. I've got all those templates that we were playing with, VM and service templates, all the profiles that we were messing with. But you can explore this down a bit more. I'm going to go into library services here, and I've got my one server. So this starts out looking like this. This is my actual server. And in here you can see that I have a number of physical objects that are reusable. I've got a couple of blank VHDs in both the older VHD and the VHDX format. I've got a couple that are smaller. I've got different custom resources, so web deploy resources, 32-bit and 64-bit. This is the application framework resources. You can get onto this one, and these are for app v, server app v, or server v or server app v. I kind of call it everything, but both in 32 and 64-bit. And you can see how these are broken down. They're actually just stored in very simple folders. So you can start to use these as reusable objects across your templates. And again, it's just a way of creating consistency. If we take a look at this one, well, I guess I can see the details here. This is just intended to be a base drive. It's actually not displaying the details I wanted. This is a 60 gig drive. So anytime I create a virtual machine that needs a 60 gig drive, this is the one I use. Whenever I need one that needs a smaller drive, I've got a 16 gig drive set up that you might use as a system drive just to install Windows and maybe an application on. It's designed for Hyper-V. You can have others. It understands ESX and it understands Citrix, the older virtual server, Virtual Center. I mean, you've kind of got everything in here that you need. So the idea is to just create a big library of reusable resources. You could potentially put a VHD in here that has a pre-installed copy of Windows, although that kind of defeats part of the purpose of what VMM is designed to do. It wants to deploy that OS from an image. So that's kind of where, let's see, back on Fabric, that's where your Pixie servers come into play. The idea is that you're going to have Windows Deployment Services, which is a Pixie server set up someplace, so that when VMM pushes out a virtual machine, it can use the Pixie server to install the operating system from there. But there's a lot of different ways you can install this. For example, I've got the Windows pre-installation environment in here, and you can pull that updated image down from the Pixie server or push that around and really manage your operating system versions and everything else. There's a ton of different ways you can do this. You know, in terms of where we're at right now in this MCSE education, understanding how a virtual machine manager works, understanding that what it really wants to do is play around with service templates and VM templates, and that those allow you to deploy an entire service all as a set with multiple VMs, where to set those up, where to go set up a few of the things that lead to the templates, such as capability profiles and operating system profiles, where to have a few of the things that basic reusable sources like blank VHDs and so forth. Those are all the things you really, really need to focus on at this point. You can obviously dive a lot deeper into VMM, but for right now, that's kind of the level you need to be working with it at. So there's your crash course in System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2012. We did a brief overview just to kind of help you understand where it's coming from and how it thinks you ought to manage things. Talked about service templates, which are a brand new thing in System Center Virtual Machine Manager 2012. Also talked a little bit about how those can tie into things like self-service provisioning. We looked at operating system profiles, hardware and capability profiles, and I showed you how to set up an image and template library. Also looked at how to manage logical networks within the VMM environment. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.